What's up, Browns fans? Here we are the day before the draft, so it's time for the final stop on the road to the 2020 NFL Draft. Nathan Zegura and Andrew Gribble, and we've gone through some of the positions we think the Browns could be targeting in this draft. So, Gribbs, let's get right into scenarios, and we'll look at the first two picks, the impact that could have on the rest of the draft. But I think, as you've said all along, from day one, 99.9% of mocks have had the Browns taking a left tackle at 10. So if it falls that way, let's just go through that scenario. Browns stay at 10, make the pick. Who would you like to see there at left tackle?
Yeah, I think I've gone back and forth on this, but I've come back to Jedrick Wills of Alabama just because I think he's the safest bet. I think he's the best overall tackle probably in this class. I'm less worried about the move from right tackle to left tackle than I used to be for a couple reasons. I like Bill Callahan's ability to help him out. Secondly, I just think this is a pick that is more than just about 2020. This is a 5-year plan at least. And if you've got the guy who can play the position the best, I'm all for getting him on board. I am a big fan of both Andrew Thomas and Tristan Wirfs, but if I have my choice, it'd be Wills.
Yeah, so it's one scenario is, look, the board that Andrew Berry and his team have put together, they identify a tackle. That is the Browns' biggest need. He's also the best player on the draft, and they go into the podium. They turn that pick in, and it's just like everybody thought it was going to be. The Browns take their left tackle of the present and future at number 10. Now, what if Isaiah Simmons is on the board when the Browns pick at 10? Maybe there's a run on tackles. Maybe some receivers jump in there. Maybe for some crazy reason, 4 quarterbacks go. A couple defensive tackles like Derek Brown and Javon Kinlaw go. CJ Henderson, the corner, slides into that first round. All of a sudden, the Browns are there. Tackles are on the board, but so is Isaiah Simmons, Gribbs.
You know, if the tackle that they want is still there at 10, I'm still taking the tackle. I just think that I'm not willing to sacrifice away from the tackle if that's who I really want, just because Isaiah Simmons is there. But if I'm trying to settle for a different tackle, then I'm jumping all over Isaiah Simmons. So it's a long way of saying this way, that way, but I'm not sacrificing the best tackle on my board for Isaiah Simmons, as good as he may be.
It also, I think, depends a little bit on who's higher on the Browns board. If Isaiah Simmons is the third best player in the draft, according to the Browns, then, based on what Andrew Berry said, I think they would go that direction. So another way to look at this, so we'll get to what does that mean if the Browns do go with an Isaiah Simmons, or let's say a Jeff Okudah is there, would be another scenario. And let me throw out another one, a crazy one. The top player on the Browns board is maybe CeeDee Lamb. Maybe it's Jerry Jeudy. And at number 10, they say, okay, we're taking a wide receiver.
I mean, that you've got to play. I mean, you've got to stick by your guns, which is what Andrew Berry's talked about, is drafting like it's an expansion team. And I've definitely come a long way on this in the last month, because we're not talking about drafting a running back. I mean, that would be a different conversation. This is a more premium position, and you've got one of the best 1-2 punches in the NFL in Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr. But I mean, this is a gifted wide receiver class, and these are players that don't come around very often. Both Jarvis and Odell are coming off significant offseason surgery. You don't know what kind of offseason program you're going to have this year.
Right.
I'm more open to the idea. It would just be a little weird to digest if there are still tackles on the board that you think would make sense at that point. That's where it'd be maybe a little weird, but if there's a run on tackles and all of a sudden you've got CeeDee Lamb or Jerry Jeudy way ahead of everyone else on your board, you can't swing a trade. I don't see a harm in adding them to your roster.
Nor do I. And I think that's a very interesting scenario. And it's one that you've warmed to over the last month. I've really kind of come out of left field. And maybe I'd say the last 3 days that I've warmed to the idea of the Browns taking a receiver earlier in this draft, first, second round, maybe even with that first pick in the third round than I would say, even a week ago. So as we take a step back now and think about this from a scenario standpoint, here are the scenarios at 10, right? Either the Browns have the tackle that they want to get. He's on the board. They take him at 10. Now they could also stay at 10. We talked about maybe Isaiah Simmons if he falls, Okudah if he falls, one of these top wide receivers if that's the direction they decide to go. So that's what those are the scenarios if the Browns stay at 10 and pick at 10. If the Browns don't have the tackle that they want at 10, scenario 2 would be a trade back possibility, staying in the first round and picking up assets and now getting into that second group of tackles with an Austin Jackson, an Ezra Cleveland, a Josh Jones, Gribbs.
Yeah, the calculus, though, on that is always tricky because you don't know how far back you have to go. And it's one of those things where sometimes when you watch these teams trade back, sometimes there's multiple trade backs. Like you look back at what the Browns did back with the Phil Taylor draft. Obviously, that didn't end the way you wanted it to, but those were multiple steps back because you probably identify someone you want, but you want to keep getting more and more if you think you can get them with a later pick. You look back at 2016, the Browns went from 2 to 8 to 15. So you just you try to get these benchmarks. You don't want to go back too far and then still miss out on the guys you want. So it wouldn't surprise me if the Browns do decide to trade back, that there's then multiple ones, because then you're trying to maximize your ability to move back in the draft while still getting the player you want. So I would think I can throw out a team that might want to move up. You think about the Buccaneers at 14. That'd be someone that would maybe be the first incremental trade back. Then you maybe look at a team like the Patriots who need a quarterback. Then maybe that's step 2. I mean, so these things, you can't make that one big jump back. I think the Browns were able to do that back in 2017 because they'd already made their number 1 pick with Myles Garrett when they went back from 12 to 25. You don't see jump backs that far very often.
No, and I think you mentioned some of the trade partners just to kind of flesh this out a little bit would be, you mentioned the Bucs at 14. At 15, the Denver Broncos have been a team that's been talked about a lot, wanting to come up to 10. At 16, the Falcons want to come up, and their target is Henderson, the cornerback. And then I've even heard Philadelphia wants to come up. They're in the early 20s, come up, get a receiver. You mentioned as well the Patriots, who sit at 23. So I think there are a lot of possibilities, even as you said, for a two-step back or a 2-pronged trade back scenario that would land you most likely an offensive tackle still in Ezra Cleveland, Austin Jackson, Josh Jones, or if maybe one of those guys like maybe a Mekhi Becton falls after his little hiccup there with the failed test, that maybe he's somebody you're still able to get after moving back. So I think that's another scenario. So in round 1, I would still put it at, and you tell me, I think it's probably 90% the Browns come out of round 1 with an offensive tackle, and that would either be at 10 or in a trade back scenario with that second group we talked about.
Yeah, I mean, we've been through a number of these. If it's the most boring possible outcome or the most one that we usually agree on that seems pretty logical, that's what it usually ends up being. And I think that you just look at the Browns roster, they address so many needs in the offseason, but if you started a game today, who's your starting left tackle? I mean, that's just the one area where there's just a question mark. I know there's options in free agency still or potentially in trades, but right now you don't have that guy right now. So that's why it lines up with the strength of the draft, the needs on the roster. It's kind of the perfect marriage.
All right, let's quickly get into that second round pick, number 41. If it's a tackle in the first round, I think we've talked about it a lot. We're thinking it's a safety, and the names Grant Delpit and Jeremy Chin have been kind of at the top of that list, or potentially even a wide receiver if one of these very talented guys fall there. But I would say lean safety, keep wide receiver in the back of your mind if it is a tackle in that first round.
Yeah, and I think that's just more about the strength of the draft where we think it's going to be in the second round. Clearly, the wide receiver is going to be a position of strength in the first 4 rounds, I think, of this draft because of the talent in the class. You're going to get value at wide receiver no matter where you're picking. But safety, there just seems like there's that cluster of guys. Once Xavier McKinney goes off the board from Alabama, there's about 4 or 5 guys who are about second, third round talents, and that's where it could match up and work well for the Browns, who did address the position in free agency. But like you said, you might need some more longer term solutions at that position. And again, wide receiver, just you could get one in the second round, third round, maybe even fourth round. You're probably getting some value there.
Absolutely. Now let's go flip it to the 10%, which would be that the Browns come out of the first round with an Isaiah Simmons or a Jerry Jeudy or a CeeDee Lamb. Then in the second round, I would think the Browns would be a candidate to be one of those teams that hops back into the back end of the first round to try to get that tackle like a Cleveland, a Jackson, or a Josh Jones.
Yeah, or at the least maybe moving up in the second round, because I think you could probably get to day 2 with the chance that maybe Ezra Cleveland gets there, maybe Austin Jackson gets there, Isaiah Wilson. I think there's probably going to be at least a couple of those guys that get to day 2. The issue is, I mean, the Browns we've been so used to having double-digit assets every year. You're not exactly stockpiled right now. I mean, you've got a decent amount. You're not hurting, but you don't have the war chest that you've had the last couple of years. So then you're talking about maybe throwing in players in these deals to move up. I mean, this is not as simple of a move up as it has been in years past.
All right, Gribbs, let's wrap up our final stop on the road to the draft. Give me the Gribbs dream scenario for the first couple of rounds and kind of what that looks like.
I mean, I think the dream scenario is you get your top tackle that you've evaluated, even outside of what you're expecting to happen. Your number one tackle, you get him at 10 without having to part with any assets or anything like that. And then potentially in the second round, you are getting either a safety that you view as maybe the one or two best safety in the draft, or a wide receiver that maybe you view in the top 5 of this draft. And you're able to get that kind of player at 41. I think that's a pretty dream scenario for the Browns. And again, we like Grant Delpit, but maybe it's someone else that they like at that safety position that they're thinking they're getting a real steal at 41.
So I'm with you. I'm just going to throw a wrinkle because that is also my dream scenario, but I'll throw a little wrinkle in it. And that is this: the Browns are able to move back in the first round. They are able to get another second round pick. And so that they can come out with an Austin Jackson or an Ezra Cleveland in the first round. And in the second round, get maybe Grant Delpit and a guy like a KJ Hamler out of Penn State. So you get that speed receiver, you get your safety, you still get a tackle, and then you sign Jason Peters to a 1-year deal to kind of fill in until your developmental tackle and Cleveland or Jackson are ready to step in and play week 1, knowing it's a little bit of a weird offseason. So that would be my dream scenario. Give me 3 quality players in the first 2 rounds, knowing that we still have some more to work with there in the third round. But again, if you can get the guy that's your best player on your board at number 10 or the best tackle on your board who happens to be the best player at that time, of course you do it. And then you deal with round 2 and see what you can get there, safety, wide receiver, and improve this team. But I got to tell you, it's going to be exciting because tomorrow night we're going to see how this starts to play out. And as we laid out in those scenarios, what happens at 10 or doesn't happen at 10 is going to have an impact on what happens at 41 and beyond for the Browns. And we'll get to see that starting tomorrow. So Gribbs, thank you so much. It's been fun every stop of the way on the road to the NFL draft. Don't forget, tomorrow night, tune in 6 o'clock for the Browns virtual draft party presented by Bud Light Seltzer. You can register at clevelandbrowns.com. We've got Browns Countdown 7 to 8 on News 5, and then full radio coverage on the University Hospital's Cleveland Browns radio network from 8 to midnight on Thursday, 7 to midnight Friday, and 12 to 3 on Saturday. It's a big one. It's going to be the draft. Thanks for joining us on the road to the NFL draft.